Welcome to the GeekBits podcast with your hosts, Mike, David, and Craig. Okay, welcome to the GeekBits podcast, episode number 9. We're going to be talking about legacy car manufacturers and how they're going to deal with the electric revolution that's coming. One of the things I wanted to do, since I've been driving an electric car since like 2011, I think, something like that. I've had a lot of experience through the last 10 years or so that I think a lot of newcomers to the topic are probably not even going to be aware of. And I think it's important to talk a little bit about that. And so I'm going to kind of like monologue for like the next 15, 20 minutes and just tell you some of the things that have happened over the last 10 years. And of course, Mike and Craig are welcome to interject with questions or their own stories or whatever. And then when we get through there, then we'll jump and talk about what the future is going to hold for this. And a lot of that's just going to be speculation. We're going to, that's what we do here. But before I even get started on that, I just wanted to mention a couple of things. I've got me a little outline here because I got a lot of stuff to talk about. And I want to talk about like what forces change in a marketplace, like technology disruption. And if you look at like any of the technologies that have been displaced, it's almost always from an outside company. And an example I'm going to throw out there is like
a non-incumbent.
Yeah. So like digital cameras, for example, were introduced by companies like Casio, Logitech, and originally, and not by like Kodak and or
Polaroid,
all those. No, yeah, because they were happy making the products that they made, and they didn't feel any reason to introduce this new product. And another similar example would be like digital streaming. It came from companies like Apple and Netflix, Amazon, stuff like that, not companies like Sony or BMG or Virgin or any of the traditional music companies, because they were happy with the paradigm that they had of selling music on physical media and selling it in stores. And
even Blockbuster Video, if those of you that remember that, got its, its rear handed to it because they didn't get into the streaming model. Like even before Netflix was doing streaming, they were sending the DVDs in the mail and that sort of thing. And Blockbuster, just never jumped on board. They wanted that traditional, in the store model.
We've been doing business this way for X number of years. It's always worked for us. We don't see
why change the recipe.
Right. Yeah. And many times the hesitancy to change, like David mentioned Kodak, the hesitancy to change is because they have a secondary market that they're trying to maintain. Like, for example, the selling of the film that goes in those cameras, right?
Right. Kodak was very invested in not just selling the cameras, but they did the processing, the film. They sold all of the heavy equipment that was used for developing all that stuff. So yeah, they had a lot to lose.
Yeah. So making a digital camera almost put them out of business. Right? We're not going to do that.
Didn't Xerox have the first exposure to a Windows-based computer or a computer with a mouse or something? And they're
Steve Jobs stole it.
Yeah, and then
and Bill Gates really.
And they were they didn't have really interest in computers because they're well, we're a paper company. We do copiers and stuff like that. So you see this pattern through technology and industry over and over again.
I want to talk about the first EVs. I mean, I don't want to talk about the ones that were introduced back in the early 1900s, the Baker Electrics and stuff. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the first modern EVs, which would have, we're talking 2010, like when the Chevy Volt came out and the Nissan Leaf and some of these others. And, obviously I was watching that market very closely at the time, and I did end up buying one of the first Nissan Leafs. In fact, I had the honor of being at least the dealer told me anyway, I was the first Nissan Leaf owner in Texas, I think he said. But these cars, and there were several that followed within the next year or two. Ford had their C-Max Energy, and then Fiat had their little 500e, and Ford also had their little Focus Electric that was like a conversion of the regular Focus with the battery filling up the whole trunk and, all of these things. And these cars, they got, usually 80, 90 miles of range, and they didn't have any kind of charging infrastructure or anything like that. But these cars were made primarily as compliance cars. And for those that don't know what that term means, it's used heavily in the when people talk about EVs these days. But basically, California had this rule that you had to build a certain number of EVs or you couldn't sell cars in their state. So every company had to produce, a token amounts of electric cars. So what they would usually do is it would just take one of their existing cars and just kind of convert it a little bit over. And often they would outsource, have some other company make the drivetrain, and then they would just put it in their car. And they usually wanted to sell like maybe 2,000-3,000 a year of these because that's what they had to sell. And they didn't want to sell a single unit more than what they had to make. In fact, the head of Chrysler said right on like national news one day when he was being interviewed, and they asked him about electric cars, and he's like, "Yeah, we have one, and we hope you don't buy it." And the confused reporter was like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "Well, because we lose $14,000 on every one that we sell."
So I'm assuming like the purpose of this law was to kind of drive the industry forward
Yeah.
and kind of force the car makers to get on the environmental bandwagon or whatever.
Yeah.
Did it help achieve, to your knowledge, did it help achieve that goal? Like, did it push some innovation forward?
I think it did because despite the fact that the car companies tried really hard not to make these cars too desirable, they had to make them at least desirable enough that people would buy them. And,
Yeah, because they had to sell their 2000 or whatever.
right. And, I think it did help educate people. People did buy the cars. They say, "Hey, you can drive this to work every day. It does work." Because a lot of people out there would just say electric cars just don't work. I heard that so many times. And so even though these cars were not that great, they did work, and people did experience that, hey, you can do this. And the car companies learned how to make them. And they got to experiment with different concepts and battery types and whatnot. And so yeah, and I want to talk a little bit about the cars, of course, that they did make. They marketed towards tree huggers,
Environmentalists.
Yeah, that
you
was
wacko nut jobs.
I had an argument.
We're
going
going
to
get destroyed in the comments now.
Yeah.
I had an argument one time.
I had
even though-
mine changed where it actually runs off of coal. I stick the coal in the back.
Coal in
just
the
like,
back,
just like
yes.
the DeLorean from Back to the Future, but it's all coal.
Wait, what do you call it? What do you call the thing in the that you put the stuff in the
Mr. Fusion.
Mr. Fusion. Yeah.
Yeah,
We
it's
get
Mr. Cole.
You have Mr. Cole in the back of your car.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, I actually, at one of the auto shows, they had a rep out there from Nissan, and I already owned a Leaf at that point, but I was talking to, they had the Leaf there at the auto show, and I was, and he was telling me on and on about how, environmentalists are buying this car and whatever. And I was like, yeah, but you know what? You're never going to sell any volume of this car if the target market is environmentalists. I mean, there's environmentalists out there that's going to buy it, but your average car buyer is just going to see that, and it's like walking through the grocery store and seeing low-fat ice cream on the shelf, right? There's people that will buy that, but most people are going to assume, hey, this low-fat, that probably tastes bad.
Not any of us in this room.
Yeah.
But
most people are going to say that's low-fat, that probably tastes bad. Let me move on to the good stuff, know? And I even criticized him. I said, look, the only thing you've got on the back of this car, it says 0 emission, and a big logo. It was like 2 feet wide. Or no, it probably wasn't that big, probably about a foot wide. And I'm like, that's your marketing slogan for this car, is that it's 0 emission. That is not going to sell any volume
to the mass
of cars.
Yeah.
because basically
don't care.
people are selfish, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's no knock if you're not a big, huge environmentalist. I'm not. I'm concerned, but I'm not
Me
banging
too,
the door
right?
down every day.
And that's kind of the thing that a lot of people assume, because I was buying EVs, that I must be some big tree hugger. And that's kind of what I told the rep. I'm like, look, there's so many advantages to these cars, and you don't market any of them. All of the commercials that you've had about this car have been about how great they are for the environment. And you don't mention to anybody the fact that you don't have to go to gas stations anymore. You have like instant torque. You don't have any oil changes or maintenance or any of that kind of baloney that you have to deal with. And it's super quiet and all these things. And you don't mention any of these things
that's
to people.
something I don't think people really think about. And my house is right on a highway, and Fort Worth has gotten a lot busier over the past 10 years since we've moved over there. And noise pollution is a thing. Like,
especially with engine braking, that drives me insane.
and the big diesel trucks and stuff like that. And so like we're
That's what I'm talking
lucky.
about. The big
Yeah.
So you know what engine braking is, where they basically use the engine. They like the cylinders are moving up and down and compressing air, right? So they basically let off the gas and then use the engine, the compression of the cylinders to slow the truck down, and it makes the truck make a real loud.
Now, do they have to downshift to do that?
Yeah,
Or-
yeah.
Okay. So it's just like
Well,
slowing
I
down.
think in the big trucks there's a button they press to turn the engine braking on. I don't think they have to actually downshift, but that is one way to do it, right? But regardless, that's what makes it really loud like that.
Right. And it's gotten a lot louder
And
in my,
it's because more and more
my
trucks have
neighborhood.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just more traffic right off of the highway near our house. So a lot of advantages, besides the environmental part.
And there's and the government, believe it or not, although a lot of people think the government's the reason they're pushing EVs is for environmental reasons, and there is some truth to that, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But the thing that I think a lot of people don't realize is that one of the reasons the government is heavily interested in it is because it reduces our dependence on oil, which, during wartime and whatnot can be scarce. And even though, we're producing a lot of it domestically now, that supply of oil has always been kind of an up and down thing, and the government feels that we would be more independent as a nation if we could produce our own energy for our own transportation locally, and so being able to produce it as electric cars, so they don't talk about that much, but that's like
it's interesting. It's kind of a security thing for
Yeah.
our nation. Yeah.
national security, exactly. So that's one of the reasons they don't talk about a lot, but that's probably more reason than the environmental aspect that the government wants to push them. But yeah, so the early cars were marketed towards tree huggers. The body styles were designed to be kind of polarizing, where you kind of either hate it or like it, or maybe nobody likes it. I mean, the Leaf, even though I owned one, I never considered it to be
A beautiful car.
beautiful car.
The most ugly cars I've ever seen.
But
In post, we should show a couple of those
we will.
cars.
yeah, we will. I also owned a BMW i3. Again, some people think that it's a beautiful car. I thought it was okay. A lot of people thought it was hideously ugly. I think Mike is one of those people.
I always found like the Prius is a little
Ugly?
boxy.
Yes,
like
ugly.
they're not. There's some futuristic appeal
and
that
tiny,
I like.
way too
but-
small.
Yeah.
So anyway, they didn't really want to make these cars particularly desirable, and even the dealerships that sold them didn't want to sell them usually for a number of reasons. And I've actually talked with some of the salesmen behind the scenes over the years about that, and they're like, they don't like selling electric cars because they're too difficult to sell, because people come up and they have 40 million questions for them.
They can't move them off the lot.
Right.
fast enough.
So one salesman told me, he said he can sell an EV and it's not a problem, but he can sell 3 gas cars in the amount of time it takes to sell one EV, because he doesn't have to explain to the gas car owner how to plug it in, how to charge it, where to go, charge on the road.
This is a very common thing in industries as they change. Look at the difference between like when when you and I worked there and you sold computers, and all the time that was spent on teaching people how to use them, and you talk about digital natives and stuff all the time, right? And so the markets are changing. So in the beginning, yes, it's going to take more and more education and all that. That's going to go away. When everybody drives an EV, they'll sell just the same, and there won't be 40,000 questions.
But,
You'll have
for
EV natives.
But for the salesmen that
EV natives.
but for the salesmen right now, they're still faced with this conundrum that they're like,
Right, and they want to make their
money.
paycheck.
Yeah, they want to make their money, so they're going to sell. And I've personally experienced this twice, and I've seen it discussed on the internet a lot, where they will flat out lie. Like, you'll go to a dealership, they've got
This is a legacy dealership.
Yeah. And for example, a Nissan dealer, I'm not going to say which one, but they lied to me. I walked onto the lot because I knew they had a Leaf. I knew they had 2 or 3 of them, actually. And we were going to buy one. We already had one. We were actually going to upgrade to a newer model. There were like 3 or 4 salesmen standing out there in the parking lot. And of course, they all walked up to me. Hey, can we help you? Whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I'm interested in a Nissan Leaf. And they all looked at each other. We don't sell those here. And I'm like, you're just out of stock, or you don't sell them? Or oh no, we just don't sell those here at all. And I started looking around for a moment. I'm like, well, what about that one right over there? And they're all surprised, like, oh, we must have just got that in or whatever, because they didn't want to deal with it. And of course, they were a little, once they realized I already owned one and they didn't have to explain all this stuff to me,
Then they were more accommodating.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I don't
and,
know if you ever heard this before, but people that sell cars are not always 100% honest. No. It's going to be a shock to our
What a
audience.
shocker.
But yeah.
Yeah, so anyway, that's been a hindrance that's been around for a while, and we're going to have to talk when we get through with this list of where we've been. That's going to be one of the things we'll have to talk about how we're going to get past some of that. I also want to talk about, this is going to be a bit of a sensitive topic, and I know we don't usually like to talk about anything political on this show, but I am going to have to pick on the Republicans a little bit here.
Oh, Lordy.
Oh, here we go.
You know, David, we're in the wrong state for that.
Yeah.
We could be in a lot of trouble.
To be fair,
Should we go lock the front doors?
Yeah.
to be fair, for all you Republicans out there, be fair. In about 20 minutes, I'm going to be picking on the Democrats.
Okay.
For a different reason.
Right
so
on.
I'm going to try to balance that out a little bit. But
Fair and balance is our motto for this show.
yes.
so this is not something that happens that much now. This is something that happened years ago, and I think that it's important to not forget about how this happened. But you know, when the Leaf and the Volt and some of these early cars, including Tesla, you know, they were making the Model S and whatnot back then, came out. There were a number of Republicans, and I'm not necessarily talking about your Joe Blow Republican that, you know, like consumer or whatever. I'm talking about the guys, you know, that run the media, right? We're talking about, like, you know, Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Fox News and all their anchors and everything.
Right.
They had pretty much, they were totally against electric cars. And they spent,
Really?
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't think that would be. I mean, I could see it as a little bit of an issue, but not like
Well, they saw it.
a major polarizing thing.
And I think they saw it this way partly because the fact that the auto manufacturers were marketing these cars as environmentally friendly, and the fact that the government was incentivizing them with taxes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
This,
I mean, let's be honest. The biggest reason is because of the oil industry. There's a lot of jobs in the oil industry, and the Republicans
they get a lot of their funding.
They get a lot of their funding from there, and that's where they
Yeah.
have to.
And to be fair, the Democrats have their own
Absolutely.
industries
Absolutely.
like tech and
Yes,
stuff like that.
yes. So, but anyway, so this happened. A lot of negative stories, and when I don't just mean negative, but a lot of misinformation. A lot of, well, flat out lies, or in many cases, they would run a story that was true, but they wouldn't tell you all the facts, and they'd let people kind of draw their own conclusions, or even the anchors on screen would draw their own conclusions from the fact without telling us the whole story. And I'm going to give you a great example. There was a Chevy Volt, early model, that caught fire in the test lab when they crash tested it. Now, this was later determined to be a result of human error, because they're supposed to, you know, like drain all the gas and discharge the battery and all these things from any car that they are going to crash test. And they didn't do that. And they crash tested.
So even a gas car would have had
even a
the
gas
same
car
issue.
could have had the same issue. So they crash tested the Volt, and then it caught on fire. And I don't even know why that became a news story, but like Fox News and all the Republican news media just caught on to this, and they kept talking over and over about how and you know, at first it was it caught on fire during the crash. Next thing you know, Chevy Volts are fire traps. They all catch on fire, and you know, and it goes on and on. And I actually got stopped twice in a parking lot back when I had my 2013 Chevy Volt. Both times, a guy walked up to me because he was getting out of a car nearby or something. Says, "Oh, this is one of those new Chevy Volts, isn't it?" I'm like, "Yeah." He says, "Aren't you afraid of that catching on fire? Do you park that in your garage?" And you know, I'll ask him, I'm like, "Well, why would you be worried about that kind of thing?" He's like, "Well, I've heard that these cars catch on fire a lot, and they're death traps and all that kind of stuff, and they'll burn your house down and whatnot." And now, to be fair, the Chevy Bolt, which starts with a B as in boy, actually does have some current recall for fires, but that's a newer product. That didn't even exist back then.
Right.
The Volt with a V like Victor, which is what I was driving,
Just had this one crash test.
had
thing.
never,
Yeah.
like there up to that day, there had never been I don't think there's still been a single case of a Chevy Volt ever just spontaneously catching on fire or whatever. The only one I'm aware of is the one in the test lab that was in that one video. And yet, because they could spin a story in a way to create outrage or to own the libs,
Concern, yeah.
you know, they were just just throw the story out there constantly of volts catching on fire. And what did they do? They succeeded. They created you say a lie enough times, it becomes truth to people.
So, there's two things I want to say about this. So number one is, have you guys seen the movie Demolition Man?
Yeah.
So in the movie
course.
Demolition Man, Sandra Bullock has to get on the back of a motorcycle with Sylvester Stallone, and it's one they pulled out of like storage or something. I forget where they got it, but they're going down the road really fast, and she's like, all of a sudden she's like, "Wait, does this thing run on gas?" And he's like, "Yup." And she goes, "Do you know gas explodes, right?" So. It
is called a combustion engine for a reason.
It is. But the point of it is I'm sure society had moved along at that point. Everything was probably electric in Demolition Man,
Right.
And now they were all afraid of gas.
Right.
So,
right.
it's the same thing.
Paradigm shift.
Yeah, paradigm shift. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, this is really more for the audience, and you guys really need to think about. When you're listening to the media and you're listening to your favorite politician, and it doesn't matter what side of the fence you're on.
Absolutely.
Forget the side of the fence. You're being lied to, and you're being lied to all the time. And
If you're not being lied to, you're being
the story is being twisted and biased by leaving out facts, like David just mentioned. And I want to give you an example of that, and it's a real world example that happened in the 50s and the 60s. Doctors were being paid left and right bonuses to lie on national TV and in ads to say that cigarettes were safe.
Yep.
In fact, many doctors even had their own like favorite packs of cigarettes that that they smoked. And it didn't come out. It took like 20 years for that to come out. That's what was going on. And so what are they lying to you about right now? Just always be thinking about that.
Absolutely. So the second thing I want to talk about on this is there was, I think it stemmed from a fact that Obama drove a Chevy Volt one time around the White House lot because a friend of his owned one, and the media caught him driving that, and they asked him about it. He's like, "Yeah, this is my friend's car, and I wanted to see it, and the Secret Service won't let me drive it outside of the White House because I'm not allowed to drive, and whatnot." And that got on the news. The next thing you know, the Chevy Volt was being labeled by Republicans as Obama car. It was the Obama car, and of course, this again.
Are you sure they just weren't mispronouncing Obamacare? They just screwed that up.
This
Obamacare.
This frustrated me a lot because this started to create this enormous hatred of the Chevy Volt within far right wing circles. And believe it or not, my wife was driving. We went through Fort Worth one time, and we actually had two guys in a big dually pickup try 3 or 4 times to run us off the freeway by trying to sideswipe us. And one of the guys was yelling, he had his window down, and he was yelling curse words at us about our Obama car.
Oh my God.
And I think at the time you actually voted Republican.
And I did. I did not. I'm gonna say this right. I did not vote for Obama, so I'll go ahead and say that right now. So that was
irony.
That was the irony. In fact, and once this whole Obama car thing started, the biggest irony of all.
Now,
is
back up a second, because this is hurting my brain a little bit that people are willing to do this. Did you have any like bumper stickers or anything that like?
In fact, I hate bumper
political?
stickers. I refuse to put bumper stickers on my
Yeah.
car. And so anyway, the biggest irony of all is that the reason, of course, again, that Republicans were so mad about this electric car stuff was, well, they claimed anyway, is because of the tax incentives and other government incentives that was being used to promote them. And the irony is that all of those incentives, every single last one of them, was put in place by George W. Bush.
Yeah.
And so it's just that happens that, so he started the whole revolution there. And then, of course, it takes time for these things to be made.
Right.
So they didn't come to market until after he was out of office. So now Obama's in office.
Right.
And a lot of people, it's funny how people, they always, like anything that goes wrong, they always want to blame the president that's in office. Or if anything that goes right, the president that's in office always gets the credit.
Yeah.
Regardless of what, previous president may have done, good or bad, especially if he was of a different party.
Delay before a lot of things take effect.
Yeah.
And, we don't receive our political, changes in real time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so anyway, so that's that was an issue. And then I have one more thing I wanted to say about the political thing. During the Obama administration, they did try to fund a number of green initiatives that were separate from what Bush had done. But a lot of these car companies were thrown into this, lumped in with Solyndra and Fisker. So for those that don't know, Solyndra was big news back in the time because the government had funded this big solar company, and like they spent millions and millions of dollars on this big factory, and then they went out of business like almost immediately. Like I don't even know if they ever got the doors open because the Chinese manufacturers had basically outdone them before they even got started. And so, this was considered one of Obama's green failures and whatever. And so a lot of the politicians were lumping like Tesla in. I can't tell you how many times I heard Tesla in the same sentence as Solyndra, because the government had also given Tesla a loan. And what a lot of people don't know is they also gave loans to General Motors and Ford, and I think even Chrysler, but definitely General Motors and Ford, for also advancing their EV programs. And that's where the Leaf and the C-Max and the Focus Electric and all that came from. I mean, those companies didn't even use their own money to develop it.
Right.
They used government money. So again, these were some of the reasons why a lot of people were very, very against this, and the government shouldn't be picking winners and losers and all that. And again, it all seemed to revolve around this whole like tree hugger thing, right? And if that wasn't bad enough, Tesla has been under attack not only from a political standpoint, but from short sellers. And for those that don't know, short sellers is basically, I'm not going to go into the whole explanation of it, but they're people who they bet on a stock going down rather than up in order for them to make their money. And one of the things that they will do is if they're planning to short sell a stock, they will actually spend money on misinformation campaigns, troll farms, social media posts, fake news, all that kind of stuff in order to cause a stock to sink by saying bad things about a company or making
market
bad predictions.
manipulation.
Yeah. And Tesla has been one of the, this is not by far not the only company to ever be a victim of this, but in recent history, one of the biggest victims of short sellers. So a lot of the misinformation that gets spread around,
There's an economic reason for it.
right, is not just from political sides, but also economic stuff from people literally spreading lies in order to make these companies look bad.
I'll try to find it for the links in the description, and maybe I'll even post it on the screen if I can find it. But NPR had an article where they actually analyzed comments that were posted on their website on certain articles. And this wasn't just about electric cars. This was about a lot of different topics, right? But they showed that most of the IP addresses that made negative comments on certain topics always came from botnets and VPNs, and so all that those comments are fake. So when you're scrolling through the Fox News or I guess CNN doesn't have comments, but Fox News comments, and you see all of these comments, don't be surprised if like 50% of the people that you're going with are actually troll farms, like people paid to make those comments. So
yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And so anyway, the thing is, a lot of this misinformation, it gets seeded. People believe it. They spread it around. And this has been, and by the way, I'm not making this up, but because a lot of people say, well, that's just a conspiracy theory. But the fossil fuel companies have actually spent millions and millions of advertising campaigns to say negative things about electric cars.
Of course.
And they actually admit it. It's actually on their like,
their 10K report.
Right. You can actually see, and they've even admitted it several times. I think the Koch brothers admitted spending like $10 million in, I forget exactly the way they phrased it. They tried to phrase it, but basically it was anti-EV propaganda. And,
and it's because they have this economic incentive.
They have a vested interest to slow it down. I think they know at this point they can't stop it, but they've tried to slow it down. And I think they've succeeded in slowing it down.
Oh, they most certainly have. Yeah. And again, we were talking earlier about you're constantly being manipulated and lied to. What else besides this topic? Just always be thinking about that. Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about Tesla specifically. So we've established to this point, and we're probably up to like 2015, 2016 in our little history lesson here. So we've covered about 5 or 6 years. This is kind of what's been going on. Tesla's still growing as a company. And but besides being constantly under attack by short sellers, there has been this moving goalpost for them. Like all these experts kept saying, Tesla is going to be out of business in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 months, whatever. And they'd have all these reasons why, and they'll say, well, Tesla's never going to achieve this. And there's been like 30 or 40. I've totally lost track of it now, of all the different things Tesla's never going to achieve before they go out of business, right? And so and every time Tesla meets one of these, they just move the goalpost. I'll give you an example. Like when they announced the Model 3, like all these short sellers and all these experts would come out and say, oh, Tesla is going to go out of business before they can ever bring the Model 3 to market.
I remember hearing this a lot. Yeah.
Well, Model 3 came to market, and then they're like, oh, okay. They brought it to market, but they're never going to get production ramped up before they go out of business. Well, they got production ramped up, and then they're like, oh, okay, they got that done, but Tesla's never going to make a profit, Oh, then they made a profit, and then and they just keep moving the goalpost back a little bit further, and they're still doing it to this day, saying that Tesla is never going to achieve XYZ before they go out of business.
And their stock is going to crash at any moment.
Yeah,
yeah.
And clearly none of this has happened, and the thing about it is Tesla is the only manufacturer of vehicles that makes, all electric cars. And one of the many things that sets them apart from other manufacturers is they want to make their electric cars as desirable as possible because that's all they sell.
They're not trying to appeal to a certain market. They want everybody to buy their car, right?
Right. Now, GM and Ford and Chrysler and all these other car companies that have made electric cars up to this point, they've been trying to make their electric cars as least desirable as possible because they don't want them to compete with their profitable gas cars.
Right.
And they also probably knew that they could make better electric cars and possibly even sell them at a profit. But it kind of goes back to what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast. We're like, well, we like the way we're doing business right now. It would take billions of dollars of investment to make electric cars at an economy of scale that would be profitable. We don't want to take that risk. We don't want to move that direction. Not when we have this cash cow that we've got.
Yeah,
right now.
and I'll add something to that too, because I actually know somebody who works at Ford at a very, not say very high level, a significantly high level. And he gave me some information that I thought was fantastic. This probably won't be any surprise to anybody, but part of what the Ford and some of the legacy automakers have to do is deal with the unions. And I'm not here to say whether unions are good or bad. That's a whole different. We could do a whole podcast on that, right? Because pros and cons to everything. But part of the problem is to shift to an EV means that Ford has to, for example, stop making transmissions. They have to stop making not carburetors, fuel injectors. They have to stop making, all of the legacy car parts. And because an EV has significantly fewer parts.
Oh, and so they can't sell those parts for repair.
It really has no jobs.
No. So they have factories upon factories that make all those motors and transmissions and all those things that simply would be closed and those jobs would go away. So the unions are also part of the reason.
Okay, so so having established that, I wanted to move to talk about so these manufacturers, again, they don't want to if they made a really desirable EV and brought it to their dealership, well, suddenly it's going to make their gas cars look bad. And they don't want that. So again, they've kind of made mediocre EVs. And here's what changed all that. Tesla, when they brought the Model 3 to market and then it started selling like crazy.
Hotcakes.
It started outselling cars, you always think of as being like the top cars in the markets, like, Toyota Camrys and stuff like that. Suddenly there's Model 3s everywhere.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it became the number one selling compact, or not, what do they call that mid-size car? Whatever. Yeah, right?
Yeah, I think it may still be, but it definitely has been many months at a time. Yeah. And so once that was successful, and then of course Tesla's, they're like, okay, we're gonna make a Model Y, and we're gonna build these new factories, and then suddenly all the manufacturers they've been ignoring Tesla all this time, thinking, oh, they're not competition for us. They only make this piddly number of cars per year or whatever. Well, suddenly they're not anymore. Suddenly they're starting to look like, hey, these guys are growing really fast, and now they're starting to eat into our business. In fact, they've kind of realized, if we just keep doing what we're doing, in 10 years, Tesla will take all of our business away because they see the growth and their model is shrinking.
Yep.
Tesla is growing. Now, right now, you go out on the dealer lots and their lots are still full of gas cars, but the dealers are not oblivious, or not the dealer, manufacturers are not oblivious to the trend that's coming. And all you have to do is look at some of the other countries that are way ahead of the U.S. I'm going to throw Norway out there as a good example.
This is key. This is really key. And if we as Americans tend to only look at America, only care what happens here. But when we compare this same, because this thing's already happened in other, like what we're about to talk about has already happened in other countries. So we know the trajectory. Right.
So Norway was one of the first countries to really have a big adoption curve for EVs. And the interesting thing is, once they got to about 30%, it only took like another year or two for them to hit 90. And part of the reason for that is because once you hit 30% EVs, like almost everybody knows somebody that's got.
And when
an
you say
electric car.
30% EVs, do you mean how many are
Like
manufactured
sales.
or how
Like
many
sales.
are actually sales? Okay,
Yeah.
not necessarily on the road because
Right,
it's going to
right.
be older cars on the road.
Right.
Sure.
New cars selling off the lots. It's
Right.
30%.
So new cars being sold in Norway, I think as of this month, I think they're at like 93%. Only like 7% of people are buying traditional gas cars. And most of those are just specialized cars for specialized purposes and whatnot. So the point is, when you hit that 30%, it's suddenly you've got this situation where all the myths go away, all the propaganda, all the misinformation, it goes away because everybody knows 2 or 3 people that have an electric car, and they can ask them real world, like, hey, how does, I heard that these cars only go 20 miles and run out of the side of the road, or that these cars are really slow, or that these cars
burst into flame.
burst into flames, or whatever. There's all this propaganda out there, or that you can't drive them long distances and all this stuff. Well, all that goes away once you reach 30%, and so it took like very little time for them to jump to 90%. And Germany has just hit 30% this month, I believe. And Netherlands, I think, is also around 30%. So I guarantee you in like 2 to 3 years, those countries will be at 90% as well. The U.S., I think we're still like 4 or 5% adoption here. So we're way behind.
Yeah, and I do believe part of that, it's not just the propaganda and misinformation and all that. I do believe part of it is our market segments are a little different. So because there's not you just can't go down to the dealership today and buy an electric. Even if I wanted one, like the Ford Lightning's not out, right? And pickups are a huge portion of sales in America, especially in the southern states. And so I think it's not just the misinformation campaigns and all that.
But no, I'm certainly not. Yeah. And anyway, point is that I was making with that is that, like I said, the manufacturers, they see this happening. And China, by the way, also is massively headed towards
Big
EVs.
time.
And that's the biggest car market in the world right now. So the manufacturers have woke up around 2018. Like their eyes were opened and they're like, okay, we've been sitting on our butts too long. We got to do something now, and we got to build cars that are desirable. And I'm going to give you a great anecdote that we heard from Ford, because they actually said this in an interview. So I'm not making this up. Apparently Ford was working on a new compliance car, and back around 2018 or something like that. And it was going to be like a little SUV. And again, the engineers were told, don't make it too desirable, make it just a little bit frumpy. Don't make it too fast. Various things.
Don't make a Tesla.
Yeah. And, again, they wanted to sell
the minimum amount
that they needed to sell to please, the tree huggers and the legislation that required them and whatnot. And then when they saw the Model 3's success and saw where Tesla was headed, the executives went down to the design lab and they said, trash all this stuff. We need to build something that actually competes with Tesla. And the Mustang Mach-E was born, and it came to market just earlier this year. And guess what? Every single one they make is sold. You cannot go to a dealership.
There's a line to buy it.
You got to get in line and wait months to get your Mach-E. They're building them as fast as they can. And so, they made...
funny tangent. So I actually I pre-ordered both a Tesla Cybertruck and a Ford Lightning. And both those obviously are electric vehicles, right? And I don't even know if I'm going to keep either of them, but I've ordered them because just...
the aftermarket.
Yeah, because like there's going to be this giant line.
Hey, a little message to my wife, Trish, if we don't keep the Tesla Cybertruck that I want, we could always sell it. Huh? Sorry, that's for one audience member.
Yeah. So I simply pre-ordered them because I know exactly what David's talking about with the Mach-E is going to happen with the Ford Lightning.
They're going to run out, and the price is going to go up.
I'm going to drive it for 2 or 3 months, and then I'm going to sell it for $20,000 more than I paid for it.
Yeah,
that's my plan.
So now I've talked about where we've been. Now I'm going to talk about where we're at now, which is all of the car companies. Well, I say all. There's a couple of stragglers like Toyota and Honda that I don't know what they're doing right now, but every other car company on the planet has completely shifted all of their future vehicles and product development, R&D, all of that is now like they understand that gas cars are legacy products. That's even what they're many times calling them now.
Wow.
And that they're going. General Motors has promised to be all electric by like 2030. That's not that far away, guys. That's only like 8 years. And their General Motors is saying they will not be selling.
And that's by that time. So don't think for a minute that as we get closer to that, I mean, how then when you go to the dealership, it's going to be this pendulum, right? You know?
Right. Within 2 to 3 years, you're going to go to if it works out the way GM claims and they don't go out of business before then, within 2 to 3 years, you're going to go to a GM like a Chevrolet or a Cadillac lot or whatever, and like half the cars in the lot are going to be electric. And and it's not going to take too long, especially if they're going to be similar prices, which we're told there will be, that people are going to be like, well, why don't, they're going to take the electric one for a test drive, and then they're going to take the gas one for a test drive, and they're going to be like, man, this electric one hauls ass. This electric one is cheaper to fuel. This electric one doesn't need any oil changes. And
doesn't smell bad.
It does, it's quiet, and and all these things, and they're like, why would I buy the gas version? So it's not going to take too long for customers to see that the old product is just it's inferior, and the shift is now. See, they're not marketing like you won't see Ford marketing their Mustang Mach-E or their F-150 Lightning or any of those cars as green or good for the planet. They don't care. It's not in the marketing. It's just
that it's a badass car.
It's a badass
that's
car.
All they
exactly.
are going to talk about.
And that's where the marketing is going now. All of the manufacturers have realized this, and that's what I told them 10 years ago. That stop marketing.
David, I know you don't hear this very often, but you were right. Everybody else is wrong. I have just made David's day. So.
Yep.
So anyway, yeah. So the change is coming, and once we get rid of the stigma that electric cars are for environmentalists, which is already happening, all of that pushback that we had from the right will be gone. In fact, most of it's gone already. In fact, it's interesting because Fox News, for example, like 3 or 4 years ago, somebody flipped a switch, and it's funny. You can find a YouTube video out there actually showing you showing you dates of these. They have little video clips of them bashing Tesla, and then one day. Everything they said after that was positive about Tesla.
Oh my God!
So somewhere in the writers' room or something,
Rupert Murdoch or somebody
said, "Okay, this is our new standard."
Right. and so anyway, like I said, once you take the environmentalism aspect away from the EV market and you just focus on these are superior products, like think of other products that have come out in the past and displaced a previous product. Like I'll give you a good example: flat screen monitors. Yes, believe it or not, they're better for the environment than CRTs for a lot of reasons because they consume way less power.
Yep.
Okay. And there were sometimes you'd see like a little anecdote on the side of a box or something saying it was eco-friendly or something, but that was never the advertising for the product. People just saw them and are like, hey, I like this better than this big bulky,
way smaller,
CRT.
takes up less room. My desk doesn't have to be so deep.
And so I think the environmental benefits are just going to be, quite honestly, a side bonus.
Side effect,
side bonus. It's not going to be the marketing for these cars going forward. So, like I said, a lot of that political pushback is already disappearing and will continue to disappear over the next several years. So, I said that Ford has gotten on the bandwagon. They got their Mach-E already out. And then I was going to mention, there's a few other manufacturers that got on the bandwagon also. And Volkswagen's one of them. They started their EV push years ago, and they're now bringing several EVs to market. They've got the ID3 and the ID4, both of which have been very successful. They're bringing out a whole bunch of new EVs over the next few years. Audi, which is part of the Volkswagen group, actually, they've got a few. Same with Porsche. Mm-hmm. Porsche's headed, their Taycan is like their best-selling car now, which is an all-electric sports car. And again, that's part of the VW group. Hyundai, actually, Hyundai Kia, both they're for those that don't know, they're basically the same company with different brands. They're also they just brought out their Ioniq 5, which is proving to be a very hot seller, very capable car. Kia's got something real similar, I think. And then on the very soon horizon, we're about to get the Rivian. the F-150 Lightning, the Cadillac Lyriq, and the Hummer EV. Those are all due to basically within months to be on the market. Like I said, there's just a handful of vehicles on the market or about to be on the market that are actually designed as actual competitive products and not compliance cars.
Right. But that's about to change.
Yeah, so what we want to talk about now in the second half of this podcast is where we're going in the future, how some of these manufacturers are going to get there. One of the big problems is the Osborne effect. And take GM and Ford as great examples. You know, right now they just got the one or two vehicles.
So you might take just a second and explain what the Osborne effect is.
Okay, so
I was not aware either. So.
Oh, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, so back in the 1980s, this company called Osborne was making little portable little CPM portable computers. And they're notorious because they had just brought this computer to market. It was very successful. And then they announced that, like, oh, in 6 months, we're bringing a new model to market that is not only way better than the one that we're making now, but it's also going to be cheaper. And so
everybody stopped
buying it, and then they went out of business before they could bring the new one to market.
I know so many people that really love old Osborne computers like that. That's so sad.
And so anyway, like GM, for example, they have to worry about the same thing because they're like, well, they're still dependent on internal combustion engine sales to keep their company afloat. So they can't just go right out and tell all the general public, say, hey, guys, you know what? In a couple of years, like all these products that are on our lot are going to be obsolete. We're going to have these new
They'll shoot
EVs.
themselves in the foot, basically,
Right.
if they do that.
So they're walking.
Nobody will buy a car until then. By the way, speaking of that, my opinion is anyone who buys a gas car starting basically a year ago forward who doesn't plan to keep it for like the next 10 years is going to lose a pile of cash when they go to trade it in. So now is the worst time to buy a gas car, in my opinion.
So before we go too farther into the future, I wonder if you guys would like take a step back, and I'd like to talk about just a handful of the things we had talked about before the podcast. Some of the misinformation or like myths about electric cars, like some of that I've heard floating around. I was like,
We could
I don't know.
spend like an hour on just busting myths on that. So
I was thinking
we'll
like
just pick
maybe
a few.
maybe like 3 to 5 of these myths. So like one of the ones was my mechanic was like. He's old school. He's libertarian. He's been doing this for years. He probably leans right wing, and that's why he has the suspicion. But his thing was, well, electric cars aren't safe to work on. If I work on an electric car, that battery is going to zap me, and I'm going to die.
Yeah,
So
there was like Tesla and Edison back in they had the big argument over AC versus DC. I mean, it's like, come on.
I would bust that myth real easily and say, look, hybrids have been on the market since like 2000 or 1999 or something like that, and they have the same high voltage systems in them, even though they're not necessarily the primary driving motive force of the car.
Yeah,
and that was a concern back then too. And I've never, I mean, I'm not saying it's never happened, but I've never heard of a mechanic being killed from working on a hybrid or. And the Leaf and the Tesla have been on the market for years, and I haven't heard anybody getting.
Yeah, I've heard the same thing about, oh gosh, in a car accident, the firemen are going to get killed and electrocuted. I've heard all these different stories, and they're all not true. The cars are actually designed. I mean, like if that was true, Tesla wouldn't have a 5-star crash rating and a whole bunch of other things.
The battery pack in every EV and hybrid has a big disconnect that you can pull out, assuming you can reach it. I mean, if the car is upside down or something, that might be a problem. And then the firemen know, like they've been trained how to cut the high voltage lines properly,
and they actually carry on their truck a tool to do that with.
Yeah, an insulated tool to do that with. Yeah, but generally speaking, like when a mechanic works on a hybrid or an EV, the very first thing, if they're working on the drivetrain, I mean, it's one thing if they're replacing like a windshield or something, right? But if they're working on the drivetrain, they go to the back and there's either a breaker or a big plug that you pull out that quite literally disconnects the battery from the car, so there is no high voltage anywhere in the car. Then they put that back when they're done. If that mechanic can't learn how to do that, I'd say
we have bigger problems.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have some examples that are from my family, so I'm probably going to be
other myths.
Yeah, I'm probably going to be ousted, and so
next Thanksgiving is going to be very awkward, or Christmas dinner is going to be difficult for you.
But it's amazing to me, and I'm one of those people that I drive my big giant F-150, and I love my big F-150, and it is a gas version, obviously, and hopefully that'll change at some point. So I like my big truck, but I also have an electric car. I have a Tesla Model X, which my wife drives most of the time. I'm lucky. Every now and then she lets me have it for a few days. But, our family members are mostly swing to one political persuasion, and so I'm constantly getting like ribbed on the Tesla from various people, and so just a few, I guess a week or so ago for Thanksgiving, we went somewhere. And one of my family members, so I said, we might have to stop and charge the Tesla on the way home because I don't know if we have enough charge to get back. And he kind of smirked at me. And I'm like, why are you smirking at me? What's so funny? And he goes, well, you're the one that wants the electric car. And so I'm like, well, hold on. What does that have to do with it? And he goes, well, if you had a gas car. And I'm like, hold on. So your Mercedes doesn't ever have to stop at a gas station? Like, why the double standard? Like, why is it a big deal that I have to stop and charge, but it's not a big deal when you have to stop and get gas? And then he sort of changed that into it's a range thing, right? And I'm like, okay, hold on. It gets 300 miles or
on a single charge.
Like, what's the problem here? So I just didn't charge it before I came over here, and now I need to charge it, just like you might have to gas up, right?
I've been running late to something, and it's like, oh shoot, I'm out of gas. I forgot to get gas.
Got to stop and get gas. And then the same family member about a year ago did the same thing. When we told him that we were going to buy a house on the lake, which is about an hour drive from our current house, and he goes, well, I guess you're gonna have to trade that Tesla in. And I'm like, why? And he goes, well, you're gonna be able to drive that thing down there, are you? And I'm like, dude, I could go down to the lake and back like 3 times on a single charge, all the way there and all the way back like 3 times on a single charge. And it's amazing to me a lot of the myths that still hold true today that haven't been debunked. As a matter of fact, another family member along those same lines said to me, again, on the range thing, she said, I forget exactly how she worded it. Okay, well, it started with this. She's like, I would never buy a Tesla because, or an electric car because they're just not fast enough. And so I'm like, well, let's go out and I'll take you for a ride in mine. And so I took her down the street and I floored it. And ours is the slow Tesla, by the way.
Right.
We didn't buy the performance model.
And the acceleration is unreal.
It's unreal. And the car will do like 160 miles an hour or something like that. And so she was blown away. She could not believe.
But she had it in her head that they're all slow cars.
They're all slow and they're all crap. And then she said to me, well, I guess when they get the range problem fixed, I'll consider it. And so I said, well, what do you mean range problem? And she says to me, oh, well, they don't have as much range as gas cars. And I'm like, we figured it out later on that the car she actually came to my house in, that the Tesla actually had more range than her gas car.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean these things are just continually
now to be fair, there's a lot of misinformation out there about EVs, but some of it is true or has been true.
Sure.
And so a lot of the things that people used to complain about 10 years ago is just simply not true anymore. And the road trip thing is a perfect example. So when EVs first came out, it is absolutely true. Like if you had a Nissan Leaf back in like 2011, you could not drive it across country. At least you maybe could, but it would be
be very difficult.
It would be very difficult. It might take you 2 weeks to make the trip, and it would be really
because you'd have to keep stopping.
You'd have to keep charge and find
like
a 110 volt outlet to plug it into overnight or whatever. And there was no fast charging infrastructure. Even Tesla didn't have a fast charging infrastructure in the early days. I mean, it took them years to get it built out. And so some of that, even though it was true then, a lot of people think it's still true now. It's not. I've taken numerous road trips in both Tesla and non-Tesla EVs.
Yeah.
And, granted, I haven't driven across country, but I've driven, I think as much as 5-hour drive in my wife's Bolt, for example. We went from here to like Galveston, and I've gone to Austin 4 or 5 times, and I've gone to Houston several times.
I told this same family member I was talking about earlier. I told him, I said, look, I get in my car and I drive it just like you get in your gas car. I don't worry about the range. I don't worry about where I'm going. I just get in it and I go. And if I need to charge along the way, I find a Tesla charging station. They're everywhere.
Yeah. Right.
And in 10 minutes.
And you can find them on your phone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the nav system will tell you,
The car will even tell you where to go.
And I said, and I stop and in 10 minutes I'm back on the road again. And it's like that's another myth too. By the way, is I think it takes like 3 or 4 hours to charge a car.
Yeah,
not true.
And I can't tell you how many people who I've talked to about the charging thing where they just don't get it, And I realized after I talked to them for a little while that they have this paradigm in their mind
That the only place they ever fuel is at the charging
that
station?
it's a charging station,
Yeah.
a public charger, and they think I'm going to be standing there with my hand on the handle for like 4 hours or something like that. It took me a while to figure out that that's what one person had in their mind. And when I finally asked them, like, do you think I'm going to drive this every day down to a charging station and for 4 hours and sit there and hold the handle like you do with your gas car? And he's like, well, yeah. And I'm like,
Well, you have to hold it for the electrons to go in.
and I'm like,
How else will it will fall out? And you won't be
I'm
able to-
like, no, I plug it in at home when I get home, and I don't even.
We don't
think
have any
about it.
examples of something where we'll stick in like a wire or anything to have energy.
So yeah, I'm like, no, I just plug it in when I get home, and I don't even think about it until the next day. And if I do need to charge on the go, I'll use a fast charger. And that,
On the road.
I mean, we're talking, it's a little longer than a gas fill up. I mean, it's usually going to be 10, 15, I think 20 minutes sometimes I've been at a fast charger. But, I mean, it's, if I've been driving.
And that is, by the way, is changing rapidly. With every iteration of the fast charging.
It keeps getting faster.
Faster and faster and faster. In 10 years, it will be just as fast as a regular old, if not sooner.
But, I don't even care because the only time I use a public fast charger is when I'm on a road trip.
Exactly.
And I've usually been driving for 2 or 3 hours.
And you're going to take
already.
a break and walk around, go
That's
to the bathroom.
right. After
all of
2 or
that.
3 hours, I'm ready to get out of the car and go to the bathroom and get something to eat. I don't mind that it takes 20 minutes to get me topped back up again. So that's a
But I think the point you just kind of glazed on it, and it's really important to understand is that when you have an electric car, the entire paradigm of the gas station changes because you get home every night or whenever, and as soon as you get out of the car, you plug it into the wall,
which takes like 3 seconds.
3 seconds. Like this is not a big deal. Like it literally takes 3 seconds. Plug it in, just like you plug your vacuum cleaner in, right? It's actually easier than your vacuum cleaner because you don't have to unwrap the cord, right?
Yeah.
And then you just leave it, and then tomorrow when you get up to go to work,
ready to go.
It's fully charged, so you basically leave your house every single day.
I mean, for me,
with a full tank of gas.
It would be perfect because I really just drive my car to and from work, and I only do that 3 days a week, and then I come here and a handful of other places. I'm not even driving to Dallas, which I totally could. Like I'd have to, charge there or something. But
no, you wouldn't.
So
I could drive there and drive back on a single charge, no problem.
Or 5 or 6 times. Like my wife, like this is another. It's a paradigm shift. But my wife still hasn't completely broken the paradigm shift, and she I would venture to say that like 1 out of 10 times she parks her car in the garage that she plug it in. She's like, well, it's still got like 270 miles of range.
Right.
Why do I need to plug it in? And I'm like, well, because you have a full charge every day, but she doesn't seem to care. And so I would say that she drives her car, and she drives about 30 miles to work every day. And she plugs the car in like twice a week.
Right.
So I mean,
doesn't even think about it.
It doesn't even think about it, but yeah.
Okay, I have one more myth to bust, and then we can move on. And that is the myth that electric cars aren't actually that much better for the environment. I've been hearing this for years. That
well, I hear all the time that they're actually worse, but that's a whole.
okay. So here's what
it's a combination of things. It's the
they'll say
carbon
it's-
footprint in building the
batteries
vehicle,
and all that.
building the batteries, then disposing of the batteries, and also that the electric cars are actually coal powered because when you plug in, you're using coal as your energy source, which is probably true in some states to some degree. But so take it away.
Even if it is, it's still better. So David, take it away.
Right. Okay. So I obviously have heard this argument hundreds of times.
Ooh boy, buckle up.
And let me tell you how I deal with it. I used to try to get into arguments over the details of this type of thing, but it never really seems to help. And the problem is, like 90% of the people that say this or have these concerns about the coal power or the batteries being bad for the environment or anything are not environmentalists. It's so ironic because I'm like, the people that say this kind of thing are out there, the people rolling coal and all this kind of stuff.
I was just about to say the person that has told me that I know has a dually that rolls coal.
So actually, the guy that said they're coal powered, to me, his family is in the natural gas and oil business.
Of course. Yeah.
So anyway, so there's when you realize that most of the people throwing these arguments out there aren't environmentalists to begin with, you realize that they're not really trying to make a case because they don't really care about the environment.
Right.
They're just
saying it's not going to work anyway, so why bother?
They're trying to make it look bad, and again, this all stems from the whole environmental marketing that we've had for years going on this stuff. But I will say this. Obviously, the information's out there. You can look it up. EVs do, in many cases, consume a little bit more emit a little bit more carbon during the production process. But over their lifespan, it's night and day difference. And it doesn't even matter if they're powered by coal, which they almost never are, because depending on where you live. I mean, here in Texas, I would be closer to being able to say my car is wind or nuclear powered than coal powered, because we hardly have any coal here in Texas. And and so. But, the funny thing is they always look at I'll say, oh, well, my car doesn't have a tailpipe, but it's the tailpipe is
You're just
the
moving
power,
it. You're just
moving
moving
it
it
to the power
to the
plant or whatever.
Yeah.
And the thing that they never realize is that gasoline that they're putting in their car, it doesn't just emerge out of the ground as gasoline. I mean, they've never seen one of these huge refineries.
And it doesn't just emerge out of the ground at the gas station.
Right. Right. So, they're just trying to compare the emissions from their tailpipe to the emissions of a coal plant. And I'm like, no. If you want to be fair, you need to compare the emissions of your tailpipe and the refinery and the diesel truck that brought it to the gas station,
Right.
and all the things that happen in between.
The full supply chain.
Right. So if you want to go down that road for EVs, you got to go down that road for gas too, and you'll always find that the EV is way cleaner through the life cycle of the energy production and everything, even if it is run on coal. Way cleaner. And the information's out there. Like I said, you can go to numerous websites and read the actual data points and whatnot. As far as the batteries, I get that a lot too. Oh, the batteries,
We can't dispose of them.
They're going to be littered all through the landfills, and it's going to leach into the environment and everything. And I've always said, and a lot of people think these batteries have to be replaced like every couple of years or some crazy thing like that too. And they generally should last the life of the car.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, most of the manufacturers, Tesla started this, I think, but they warranty the battery for like way longer than the actual cars, just to prove that this isn't a problem.
Right.
In fact, Elon has said several times that they're going to be considered million-mile batteries.
Yeah.
Which, and even after they're done with the car, they'll probably wind up using them in energy storage. They're already starting to do that for off-grid storage or grid balancing. So you can, for example, use solar power, charge them up, and then use that power at night too for the grid and stuff like that.
Which, by the way, and that we could do a whole podcast on that too, but that is a super good thing, because I don't think people realize how complicated the power grid is and all the work that has to go into turning plants on and off. Like all day long, every day, plants are spinning up and spinning down generators to keep up with demand. But if we had these battery banks in there, then all of a sudden now they don't have to spin those things back up, because they can just keep them running at a constant pace. It's a really big deal. It's beyond the environmentalist and any of that kind of stuff. It's a really good thing for our grids.
Yeah, so these cars, these batteries are going to spend, 10 to 20 years in a car, and then they're going to spend another 10 years or so in probably an on-off, an energy facility of some kind, and then they're going to be recycled. And guess what? I've made the case before. I'm like, you don't see a problem with like catalytic converters filling up landfills, do you? Because guess what? They're full of valuable minerals.
They never make it to the landfill.
They never make it there because people want them. People steal them off cars just so they can take them down and get them recycled for the money, because they have valuable metals in them.
When we moved into our house, we had copper wire for the wiring in our house as the house was getting built outside, and they stole it like twice. Just like these big strips of copper and everything, because it was just so valuable, and people are desperate to steal it and sell it.
EV batteries are full of all kinds of valuable metals, lots of copper, cobalt. All these types of things are in there that are highly desirable to recycle. So capitalism is quite simply going to solve the problem of EV battery recycling.
Yeah. That will not be a problem.
That will not be an issue. So I don't know if we're done busting myths, or if you got anything else, I'll try to bust it. But like I said, we could go on. I could go on for hours telling you all the myths that I've been accused or had to deal with in person or online from people when they find out I drive an EV. It's ridiculous. So anyway, so again, talking about moving forward, I did say earlier I was going to pick on the Democrats now.
Okay.
And, so
I am delighted.
A lot of the EV crowd is extremely unhappy with President Biden right now. He actually has been on the news several times with the CEO of General Motors, Mary Barra, or Barra, however you say that, saying how General Motors is leading the way in the EV revolution. They've made more EVs than anybody else. They've done more to revolutionize the EV world than anybody else. And he will not mention the word Tesla. Like, in fact, the reporters have tried to get him to say the word Tesla, and he won't say it. And it's ironic because GM is not selling any EVs, and Tesla is selling like close to 1 million a year now at this point. And
Wait, they don't sell the Bolt and the Volt?
the Volt was discontinued 2 years ago. The Bolt is currently it's on temporary halt because of the fire recall, and they're not making them.
Oh, okay.
And they haven't been. So like there are no Bolts on Chevrolet dealerships anywhere. Haven't been for like 6 months. And yeah, they've got all these ones coming out soon, but they're not selling any right now. And Tesla, like even historically speaking, Tesla has sold like an order of magnitude more EVs than General Motors has sold. And again, I don't, I'm not trying to jump on General Motors for where their position is, but to sit up there and say that they're leading the way, and Biden and his administration, it's like they don't want to admit that Tesla exists. And then the worst part is they're trying to create these new incentives for EVs, and they're trying to give more money to union-built EVs in America.
Of course.
And which means that Tesla won't get either any incentives or they'll get less incentive
because they're not unionized.
And so right now, if the legislation passes as it is planned, it heavily favors GM and Ford, and not Tesla, even though they're the ones leading
really
the charge.
Pave the way and lead,
right.
Yeah,
And so a lot of the EV community is pretty upset with the Biden administration over this. And granted, we're not upset over incentivizing EVs. We think that's, although I don't even think it's necessary anymore.
I don't either.
Tesla has not had any incentives on their vehicles for like a couple of years now, and they still sell every one.
You know
they
how many
make.
advertising dollars Tesla has spent in its
Zero.
In its entire company history, it has never spent a single dollar on an ad. So they don't need it.
Yeah, and that's kind of the thing. In fact,
by the way, if Ford and Chevy and Toyota and all those other manufacturers had built a car that was comparable, they wouldn't have needed it either because it would have flown off the shelf or flown off the lots.
Yeah, and so right now, for example, like the Ford Mustang Mach-E, which is a compelling car, but they actually are still getting the original Bush-era tax incentives because they haven't sold enough EVs to for them to phase out of their tax credits, where Tesla has been selling EVs for years now. So I think Ford is getting a competitive advantage for being a laggard.
Yeah.
Right? And which is
strictly by Democratic government intervention, right? Like,
so.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying.
Yeah, that's another myth we probably should have busted. I'll bust it real fast, but I want to make a point, and that is because I think it's really, really important people understand this. But people are always saying, Tesla's only making a profit, or they're only selling cars because of the tax credit, right?
Yeah.
Right.
And Tesla hasn't, they don't get the tax credit anymore.
Yeah.
They've sold enough cars, and so
but they do get carbon credit.
They do get carbon credits,
but that's going away too.
That's going to go away too. But the point I want to make is the way that those tax credits work for the audience is the way those tax credits work is that once the manufacturer sells a certain number of cars, 200,000 cars. I didn't know the number good. So once they sell 200,000 cars, they no longer qualify for the tax credit. So when a customer goes in to buy the 200,001th Tesla car,
they're done.
They're done. There's no tax credit for that car. And since General Motors, who quotes, remember they just said that they're leading the way and they've sold so many cars, them and the other manufacturers still get those credits because
GM doesn't.
Okay,
they did pass they're the only other company that's passed the 200,000 mark.
Got it. So point's still the same, and that is that these manufacturers are still getting these tax credits, and Tesla's not.
Yeah. And yet, ironically, Tesla is still selling 10 to 1 or 20 to 1 compared to the other manufacturers because they're making desirable EVs
right.
and whatnot, and Tesla invested in the necessary factories and whatnot to get the battery supply chains, which they had to do years ago. These other car companies are scrambling right now because they're like, even if they had the ability to start rolling out all of their cars tomorrow as EVs, they don't have the battery supply chain to be able to. In fact, that's the reason the Bolt is off the market, because they've fixed the problem with the batteries, but they're trying to replace all the batteries in the existing cars that are under the recall. And so they don't have enough batteries to make cars and fix the old ones that have the recall. And so that's just a perfect example of how the battery supply chain is so weak for these other companies. Where Tesla, they recognized this years ago, and they invested in
Gigafactories.
not just the gigafactories, but they also invested in the companies that mine the minerals, the lithium, and all that kind of stuff that they needed. And all these other car companies just kept blowing it off for years and didn't get their ducks in a row, so to speak.
Yeah.
And so that's going to be an issue going forward as well.
So where are you on your list?
I'm done with that.
Okay, you're done.
Yeah.
So I thought you were. So I want to ask you a question, and it's really the title of the podcast. Is it game over for legacy car companies?
For some of them, it is, and
because I personally believe that in 10 years, the car market is going to have a very different set of brand names than it has today. Mm-hmm. Now, some of them will still be there, I think, but I'm curious what you think.
So Sandy Monroe, who I highly respect, recently did a video about this, talking about this exact topic, which, what he thought the car market would look like in, I think 10 years. And he put up a pie chart on the screen, and I think maybe we can find this.
I'll find it. I'll credit Sandy.
But I want to say it was about 25% of the car market would be Tesla, which is insane. I mean, that's even General Motors today is only I want to say 18% or 20%. Anyway, Tesla is going to be bigger than General Motors sales wise by 2030. And
it appears the market believes that based on Tesla's stock price.
Yeah. And he's also saying a number of Chinese manufacturers are about to start bringing in a ton of EVs to our market from names we've never heard of. And he thinks that'll be the other 25% of the market will be Chinese electric vehicles, because they have already been making tons of EVs in China for years.
Yeah. All they got to do is Americanize them and ship them over.
Yeah, and he talked about how the American manufacturers blew off the Japanese imports back in the 70s or whatever, and the next thing you know, they're overtaking the car market. And then the Korean companies like Kia and Hyundai have come in and also made a big impact, and those were blown off too as junk cars back in the 90s, and here they are. Making good cars, and Sandy believes that the Chinese companies are going to come in big time.
I remember Hyundai's being considered pieces of crap.
Yeah,
it was just...
well, they kind of were junk cars when they first came out, but it didn't take long for them to make them better.
Yeah, they adapt to the market and change things.
Toyota is the one that I'm thinking is going to be hit the hardest, because they're the number one car manufacturer today in the world. And I think because they've waited so long pushing their hydrogen agenda, which is doomed to fail in my opinion. I think that they've waited so long that they're way behind even Ford and General Motors. Ford and General Motors, which
is weird, because the Toyota Prius was known as this great
I know.
hybrid car.
It's almost a paradox. It's mind blowing that Toyota got themselves in this situation.
Yeah, they were the leaders of electrification for decades.
Yeah,
and
I mean, you sold us our first hybrid car, a used Toyota Prius that my wife, she loved it and drove it around for years.
Yeah. And Toyota is in big trouble because, like I said, GM and Ford, at least they recognized back in 2018, we need to start turning the ship now. The Titanic takes a little while to turn. Mm-hmm. They started turning it back in 2018. Toyota has yet to figure out that they need to start, or at least they haven't admitted publicly that they've started turning the ship. And so I think Toyota is going to either be out of business, or they're at minimum, they're not going to be number one anymore. They're going to be relegated.
I don't think any of these car companies are going to go out of business, because they're almost too big to fail. But here's what I think. I think they will become so irrelevant that it just won't. They might as well.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Toyota is going to be, at minimum, they're going to be relegated to a small part of the market. Actually, I think there's a good chance General Motors and Ford and Chrysler could fail completely, because this transition going forward is going to be very difficult. I talked earlier about the tightrope they've got to walk right now between keeping their internal combustion vehicles selling while at the same time trying to supply these newer, better cars, because they can't flick the switch like this. It has to be a slow transition. Yep. If it goes too fast, they won't be able to supply enough
Which
cars.
Again, Tesla, it's we have no gas cars.
Right.
Our only income is this electric vehicle. So
not really. So Tesla, that's another thing people always forget about Tesla, is that electric cars is just one of their businesses, right?
Well, that's true.
They're making solar panels and all these other
Battery
things.
That's a good
battery
point.
storage, yes. And so
these manufacturers, they have a big tightrope to walk for the next 5 to 10 years, and if they don't walk it right, they're going to go out of business before they can switch their vehicles over to electric.
Yeah, and they might
might
drown under the weight of their existing business.
So Mike brought up a good point earlier about the market value of buying an internal combustion engine car today, and I don't know my estimate might be a little bit more conservative than Mike's. I think if you buy one today, it might still be worth something 5 years from now. That's probably about the limit, though. And part of the reason is because there's just not going to be enough supply of EVs. And don't get me wrong, just like in Norway, they still got tons of gas cars on the road, even though nobody's buying them.
We're talking
Right.
about new car sales.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Nobody's buying them, but there's going to be they're going to have those gas cars on the road for 20 more years until they wear out.
Yeah, and people, like the used car market's going to continue to
Yeah.
recycle them, and they're going to get
Yeah.
cheaper and cheaper, and a lot of people are going to buy them because they're going to become so dirt cheap.
Yeah,
You know.
exactly. But I want to give an example out there. I used to work at a computer store where we back around 2000 to 2005. And, one of the things that we did was, we took trade-ins because we sold a lot of used equipment and we sold a lot of new equipment. So this was a privately owned computer store. It's not like your, chains, Best Buy or any of that kind of stuff. It was a local store here in DFW, and I was the service manager. I got stories I could tell about that some other day. But the one thing that's relevant is I got to see how trade-ins were. I'll give you an example. So some guy would come in there and buy like a top-of-the-line CRT monitor in like 2000. And then he'd bring it back in like 2004 to trade it back in. And at this point, we're like literally paying like $10 trade-in for a CRT of any kind because LCDs had taken over the market during that time.
It flipped like that.
And so this guy, he spent like $300 or $400 on a CRT, and he brings it in. He's like, "Well, I want to trade this in," and I'm like, "Okay, I'll give you $10 for it." And then he'd be all angry. "I spent $400 on this top of the line CRT," and I'm like, "Yeah, I'm sorry, dude, but look, we're selling the same exact thing on the shelf over there for $20. How am I supposed to give you, $200 trade in or whatever on something I'm going to sell for $20? Nobody wants these anymore." And he didn't see the market change coming. And there's going to be people, I guarantee you, they're going to go out and they're going to buy an $80,000 or $100,000 internal combustion engine vehicle here maybe in the next year or two, thinking they got the top of the line thing. And then they're going to drive it for 3 or 4 years, and they're going to go to trade it in. And the dealer's going to be like, "I'll give you $10,000 for it, $5,000 for it, whatever." And because nobody's
going to lose his mind because it's like, this is a luxury car.
Right. And that is exactly what is coming. I don't know exactly when that's coming. I could be off on the dates, but that scenario is coming because once all these other manufacturers start dumping the EVs.
Man, I think the LCD monitor example of that is a fantastic comparison because I went through that when I was doing running an IT shop for a big Fortune 500 company, and it's like literally we went from having like everybody in the entire company had a CRT monitor to nobody having one in less than a year. And that just because the prices of those monitors just hit a price point where it was let's just replace them all. Let's be done with that.
And for those that might not, I should have mentioned this earlier, just to give you an idea of where Tesla's at right now. And by the way, I'm not trying to shill Tesla or whatever. I don't even own one. I used to own a Tesla. I actually don't own one anymore.
Oh, so I guess your 8-bit guy starter pack is wrong.
I still have a Chevy Volt.
We have to contact that guy on Reddit and have him update it.
Yeah.
The reason I sold my Tesla was totally for financial reasons. It's a long story, but I'm not opposed to having another one, for example. But just so you know where Tesla's at, right now they're still selling every car they can make. They're trying to make them as fast as possible, and they just literally can't make enough to fill the demand. And they have a factory in Fremont, a factory in Shanghai that are both operating at maximum capacity, still can't meet the demand. They're about to open, like literally, I think next month or the month after, this huge factory down here in Austin that is, if you haven't seen it,
it is unbelievable.
It is, we've got a General Motors factory here in Arlington that's just a few miles from here. So that GM factory looks like a baby factory compared to the one down here in Austin, And then they've got that one in Berlin that they're about to open, and it's just about as big. And they're going to be pumping out the Cybertruck and the Model Y and this new, they've been real tight-lipped about it, but some $25,000 hatchback car of some kind probably that's going to be, targeting the cheaper end of the EV market. And, they're going to be making millions and millions of cars, and I guarantee you it's going to be the same problem. They're still not going to be able to make them fast enough. And this is what these other car manufacturers, they see this, right? So for those of you that don't think that Tesla's growing that fast, when I said earlier that they would gobble up all of GM and Ford's business in 10 years, I'm not kidding. They're expanding at a rate And I guarantee you, as soon as they're done with those factories, they're probably going to break ground on a new. They've already been talking about breaking ground on a new factory.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And what people also don't seem to understand, and I don't know how they're doing it, by the way. I mean, I think, people always, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that Elon Musk, he doesn't actually know how to do anything. He's not very intelligent, blah, blah, blah. But let me tell you something, they opened that factory in Shanghai, and people, like analysts, were saying it was going to take them 2 to 3 years to open that factory.
It was less than a year.
It was nine and a half months, I think, that they,
Wow.
that they from the day that they broke the first shovel, on the ground to the time a car come off the assembly line. That's unbelievable.
And they're going to continue to make more
efficiency.
and more factories. They're going to continue to create new models of vehicles to address each segment of the auto market. And like I said, the legacy car manufacturers, they see this and they know, and they're scared. And they,
I will bet you money. I will bet you. I'll bet $500, but there's no way to prove it. But no, you go to these. You see the outward facing. The only thing you ever see from like Ford or GM or any company really, no matter who you work for, you only see that what the story that they want you to hear. Right. That's what their press releases are all. But I've been in plenty of boardrooms, being a business executive over the years. I've been at lots of big companies boardrooms and listened to them, and I know when companies are lying and when they're not, and how they go about it. And so, I guarantee you, in the Ford and Chevy boardrooms, there are these statements have been made. We need a Tesla. We need right. We have to compete with that. They are going to kick our asses. There's all kinds of things being said like that in those boardrooms that you're not hearing. Guarantee it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure.
So,
and it's funny, as a consumer, like your average consumer, especially in this country, in the U.S., they're not seeing this yet. And again, the reason is because these manufacturers, they keep advertising their gas cars or whatever because they have to keep selling those.
Right.
And even though they know that's a legacy product, they're not exactly, I mean, us people that follow the market on this stuff, we see it coming.
Right.
But the average Joe out there driving their Chevy,
they just see that
whatever,
these are the cars that are coming off the lot. And it's what's advertised.
And again, back to the whole what's going on in the boardrooms, not what's happening on the outward facing stuff. I mean, they're going to hype their cars. They're going to tell you how great their gas car is because they have to keep selling it. They don't have anything else to sell you. But you mark my words, as soon as those cars come out, as soon as they get to the place where they feel like, okay, we can cannibalize that old business now.
Sure.
They're going to start telling you how crappy their old cars are.
Yeah.
You watch. You mark my words.
Absolutely.
So, I have a quick question. Maybe you guys can answer. Given where the market is now, if somebody's buying a car today and they want to buy an electric car, whether brand new or slightly used or something, what would you recommend? Like, so I'm hearing a lot.
I think we probably have different opinions on it, but
yeah, that's great. Like, I'm hearing a lot of Tesla. You mentioned some of the other cars like the Nissan Leaf, but that's not out anymore.
It is. You can still buy one.
So buy them. We mentioned the Volt. Maybe that's the one I was thinking of. But what do you recommend for people that
typically I would listen to see kind of what their needs are and what their budget is. That's going to be a big one. If you can afford a Tesla, that's absolutely or one of the Tesla competitors like the Mustang Mach-E or a
new Rivian
or
that kind of
Porsche
stuff.
Taycan or something like that. Sure, great. If you can afford that, that's the way to go. And those vehicles are going to hold their value really, really well. Now,
our Tesla, by the way, because we were looking into this, because my wife really likes the new Tesla because it's got the new dash and all that.
Right.
And our Tesla is worth almost to the penny what we paid for it 2 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, so we could the problem is you can't get a new one, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, some of these older compliance cars, I don't necessarily recommend. I'll give you a great example. I still own a Fiat 500e. We don't drive it very often. I drive it once a month. I paid almost nothing for that car a few years ago, although right now it's actually worth more than I paid for it because of the crazy used car market. But yeah, that car, for example, I kind of sometimes think maybe I ought to sell it while I can because they only made a few thousand of those and they haven't made them in years. And it's like if something goes wrong with it, like this part of the drivetrain, I may not be able to get it fixed because it's out of warranty now. So they have no obligation to fix it for me. And I know the car company's like, oh, well, they have to supply parts for like 10 years or whatever. But that doesn't mean they can't gouge you charge me 10 times what the car's worth.
Yeah.
To
so
get
that you'll never
repair.
buy one. Yeah.
Right. And so So yeah, I mean, I would worry. I would hesitate to tell anybody to buy one of those compliance cars that were only made in token numbers. Now, Nissan Leaf, they made like hundreds of thousands of those, so you're always going to be able to get parts for them. Chevy Volt, good. Those are, they've proven to be pretty reliable vehicles. The
Okay.
resale value is terrible on them, just for various reasons, but. But that's kind of good though, because it usually means they're fairly affordable. I mean, I bought my daughter a Chevy Volt for when she went off to college, a used one, a 2019, a used one for $14,000.
Wow.
Of course, actually, it's worth about $24,000 now because of the over the last year, the used car market has gone bonkers. But
Right.
point is, it was a pretty inexpensive car at the time for almost a brand new freaking car because the resale value on them so bad. And I think the reason the resale value is so bad on them is because they quit making them, and everybody who wants an EV wants a Tesla, or they want
want
one
the
of
newest thing.
these newer things, right? So, like I said, any of the old plug-in hybrids or the old EVs that have like less than 100 miles of range, those are not selling very well anymore. Not to say that they don't work for a lot of people if they have a a commute or a budget that fits that, but yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to answer it a little bit different than David.
Okay.
And I think it's a great question.
Well, it's pertinent to me because my son crashed our old Honda Accord.
Oh, that's right. I saw that on Facebook.
Yeah,
That's
so
we need to do a podcast about Facebook.
Oh, definitely.
So
but we need a vehicle, and so that now's my opportunity to get something. But,
yeah. So, look, if you just want to save money, if all you're interested in is just being affordable and saving money, then my answer would be very similar to David's. It's, hey, yeah, you need to find a used
Nissan
one,
Leaf or
something
Chevy
like that.
Volt.
Yeah. If, however, you think about long-term value and you plan to keep this car for a while, then I personally can't recommend anything other than the Tesla. I just can't. I'd get a Model 3 or a Model Y and call it a day, because that car is going to hold its value. It's going to be worth a lot of money in a few years, where I think those other cars are going to lose value much quicker. And then the thing that we didn't talk about, I mean, we talked a lot about just the fact that the EV drivetrains and the cars are better in that way. Tesla has like everybody's ass whipped, and pretty much all of the other areas of the car too. Like the comfort of the car is just like I'm like sitting in a Tesla. Like those seats are just like ridiculously comfortable.
Right.
The technology that's in the Tesla beyond the electrification portion of it is like they're just blowing everybody else away. I mean, go sit in a Leaf and then go sit in the Tesla and just look at the dash. I mean, it's like night and day. How responsive the screens are when you swipe around on the maps and stuff. And we didn't even get to the point where we talked about the self-driving and all those features that are in those cars. A lot of people can bitch about the fact that they don't think that Tesla's really there with autopilot. I own one and I completely disagree.
Well, I'll tell you this. Having owned the Model 3, the infotainment system that Tesla has,
ridiculous. It's so good.
It's funny because people gripe and complain and say, "Oh, well, it doesn't support Apple CarPlay or Android Auto."
You don't need it.
And
wants
that's
Apple
exactly
CarPlay?
what I've said. Tesla is the only manufacturer right now that has an infotainment system that is so good that you won't miss not having Apple CarPlay or Android Auto.
I have to tell you, I'm glad you brought that up, because when we bought our Model X a couple of years ago, when I walked into the Tesla dealership, I said, "Does it support CarPlay?" And they said no. And I'm like, "Well, that sucks." But let me tell you something. After having the car for 2 years, I wish my F-150 had the Tesla system in it and I didn't have to use CarPlay.
Yep. Plugging my phone in or being dependent upon my phone in order to get the displays up there and everything and all that it's clunky. And like Tesla's is all integrated and it works so well. It's constantly being updated. So it's unlike a legacy car manufacturer where you get what you get when you buy it, and 10 years later it's exactly the same. They're constantly doing software updates.
Yeah, and then Tesla's done another thing. They've put their money where their mouth is, and they've really kind of proved some things. Like Elon said when they first built the car that that it was going to have full self-driving, and then some people said, "Oh, well, there's no way that computer that's in the car is ever going to support full self-driving." And so you know what Elon has done, and I say Elon, Tesla has done. Every single time they upgrade the software package for the full self-driving system, that requires a better computer, they just replace everybody's computers for free.
Wow. Just to be clear to our audience, we do not currently get any sponsorship from Tesla.
We do not, although
It
I
would be
will.
fantastic if we did for this.
You know what?
episode
I'm
alone.
glad you said that, Craig, because I always want to make sure that I'm always above board on everything. I
Right.
do own Tesla stock. So I
Okay.
want people to know that in full transparency.
I do not.
I do
but-
own Tesla stock, but that's not the reason I'm saying that. Actually, I bought Tesla stock because I believe in the company. I actually bought Tesla stock after I bought my first Tesla. I'm like, holy crap, this car is changing the world. I'm going to buy that stock. It wasn't the other way around.
Right.
So, yeah.
So yeah, and Tesla has everyone beat on efficiency except for maybe Hyundai. They have everyone beat on efficiency because everyone else in order.
Oh, sorry. One more thing. Sorry, sorry. I want to finish. So we talked about the. Don't forget your point. We talked about all the again the electrification stuff, but
Right.
another huge feature that the Tesla has that I think blows everybody else away, and this may not last, but Tesla has the best charging network. Period, hands down. They're fast chargers, or they now especially with the V3 chargers, you can charge the car like to 100 miles in like. Was it 5 minutes or something like that now? It's
Wow.
like ridiculous. And you're not going to find that with Nissan Leaf. You're going to have to go to like a, what do you call it?
There's EVgo, Electrify
EVgo, and
America.
some of those other ones. Which are fine.
You're a little bit wrong on that.
I'm
though.
not either.
Believe it or not, there are some cars out there that can charge faster than Tesla.
Right, but they don't have the network built out.
Right,
That's the
true.
point. And I said I said that at the very beginning. The first thing I said
did,
was
I heard him.
it may change.
Yeah.
But right now Tesla has the best network. Period.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Yeah, so Tesla has because of their efficiency, they need less batteries in their car to get the same range.
Yeah.
As other manufacturers are having to put 20 to 30% more batteries in their cars to match Tesla's range because they don't have the efficiency yet. Now, I don't say they won't get there
Yeah,
eventually.
and again, they'll get there eventually.
But yeah, that's one area where Tesla definitely has them all beat. And Tesla is continuing to innovate in the battery world as well.
Another thing that Tesla did, and I swear I'm going to sound like the people are going to blast me in the comments. I hear it now, like Mike's a Tesla shill.
Why do you read the comments, Mike?
I know
That's
I should
silly.
never read the comments.
Don't ever read.
Never read the comments. But so Sandy Monroe, David talked about him earlier. He does what his main business is. He tears cars down and sells the secrets to other manufacturers and stuff like that, right? He's got a great video on tearing down one of the Teslas, and I forget which one it is. I think it's maybe the Model 3. But he talks about how when you take the Tesla has like one pump in the front of their car that does like all of these different things.
The Octavalve.
The Octavalve, that's it, right? It does all these different things, and so like the Mach-E, for example, has several pumps, and that's where Tesla gets a lot of their efficiency, and that's because the legacy automakers still have multiple different departments that have to make all these different parts, and then they integrate them at the end. And Tesla designs it all integrated from day one, and then just builds this electric car, right?
Yeah.
So part of the reason that they don't get the same efficiency is because they haven't made that step yet. Now, don't get me wrong. I guarantee you within the next few years, you're going to start seeing Ford and all these other manufacturers produce
Doing
cars
the same thing.
Same way, right? But
It's a little like the Apple hardware, software all working together model.
exactly.
Yeah.
So they'll get there. It'll happen, but that's another thing Tesla has. The advantage they have is the highly tight integration of every component in the car. And also Tesla was one of the first to they decided, hey, you know what we can do? We can they ran this. What do they call that cable that goes? You probably know off the top of your head that goes from the front of the car to the back of the car. So Tesla designed so rather than having like all of these different cable harnesses that go from one end of the car to the other, I wish I could remember what the name of that cable is.
I don't know.
They developed this really super flat cable.
Put on the screen when you do.
I will.
Post.
And it goes from the front of the car to the back of the car, and it carries into all the stuff. And they reduced the weight of the car by I forget how many pounds or whatever. But again, the same thing, that full integration end to end that the other legacy car manufacturers haven't gotten to yet. I'll post a picture of that on the podcast.
And of course, they use an entirely different, like they use like Ethernet, TCP/IP, and whatnot in their cars for their network chains. And the other manufacturers are still using OBD2,
Which we talked about in a previous podcast.
yeah, because that's
like
what
this
their
whole
gas
network.
cars use. And they want to try to keep stuff as compatible as possible, and it's harder for them to move away from that. Tesla didn't have any
legacy to worry about.
Yeah, they just start with, it's like I used to joke with an old boss of mine. It's like, I'll just tell you because they're out of business. We used to work for a company called Pier 1 Imports, and I ran their IT department. And so the CIO and me, previous CIO and me, years ago was like, if the CEO of the company had asked us to start Pier 1 from the ground up, we wouldn't have gone out and built a big data center and bought a mainframe and a
Right.
tape silo and all that, right? We would have built it all on cloud technologies from day one, right? So that legacy stuff really hurts a company and holds it back.
Every time. And
Yeah.
like the company I work for, which I still work for, so I won't mention their name, but we're only 11 years old, but we have some legacy stuff that's like still a struggle. I mean, we're a really young company by that standard.
Yeah.
So these upstarts like Tesla and
Huge
other-
advantage.
just
Yeah.
that's why they can change the industry so much. They don't have all this old stuff that they have to keep maintaining.
Yeah, and to go along with that, like when GM, for example, comes out with a new car, a gas car, right? They're able to share a surprising number of parts with the existing
Yes.
cars that they already make.
Right.
And when they come out with an electric car, that's kind of one of the reasons why it's been so difficult for them to be profitable with them, is because they have to, like, most of those parts don't work anymore, right? So they have to engineer new things
Yeah.
for the car, and then only that one car uses it. So you don't have the economies of scale of all the shared parts between all these cars. And that's been something that's been holding back their EV programs as well.
Because they can have tons of factories out there, but none of these factories make those parts.
those parts.
Yeah.
Yep. They're making pistons for an engine.
Yeah. Right.
And it's not just that. I mean, even, if you open the hood, I mean, even like the cooling systems and the air conditioning systems, because those all have to be run on electric instead of the traditional way. And then
Instead of run on a pulley system.
the braking systems and all that kind of stuff is different in EVs. And so they have to have a lot of custom parts that are not shared with anything else, or historically speaking, that'll change.
That'll
in the
all
future.
change. Yeah.
I mean, Tesla is sharing a ton of parts, like between the Model 3 and Model Y. I think I heard somewhere it's like 70% of the
ridiculous,
parts
yeah.
are the same. And so eventually the other manufacturers will get there too, but that's been
Well, and eventually, let's be honest. I mean, we're not trying to say that I mean, Tesla's like completely a genius in this area. I mean, they are, but not completely, because look, in 20 or 30 or 40 years from now, Tesla will be facing these same problems.
Yep.
When the
Absolutely.
new technologies come along, and now they're still, like times changed, the technology's changed.
When the hydrogen cars finally take
That's
off.
never going to happen. I don't believe that for.
it's always
I've been hearing that for years.
it's
like,
always 10 years in the future.
Yeah.
And 10 years from now it'll still be 10 years in the future.
You know what? Okay, I will say this. You know what I think the whole thing with hydrogen is?
Okay.
The reason that these manufacturers continue to push it, they're trying to figure out a way to reinvent the gas station and the oil industry and all that supply chain, because look, what did like we talked about Kodak at the very beginning of this, right? Kodak's real business was selling the consumables, right? HP's real business is selling you ink,
Right.
for their printers, right?
right.
And so,
We'll give you the gun for cheap, but we'll sell you the bullets at
So the whole idea with hydrogen is to recreate a consumable market that we don't
Right.
actually need. That's my opinion.
That's really interesting, because it's like the way
I
it is
think
now,
that,
we have our existing electric grid and we just charge at home.
Yeah.
We don't need all this nonsense.
Right.
I think that certainly plays a big role in it, and I think the fossil fuel companies have also been a big influence in that, because they feel like, oh, well, if everyone goes to electric, we're going to be relegated down to, the only thing people will use oil for is like making plastics and other industrial stuff. We won't have transportation fuel anymore.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if people switch to hydrogen, well, we can supply them the hydrogen using the same channels we already
have.
already
Exactly.
have.
That's
So-
why I think that's what that's all about,
Wow.
and it's going to go nowhere. And that's the same thing like the gas like natural gas companies. They don't want to just be the manufacturing. They don't want to be the energy. What do you call it? I just lost my brain. The generation. They don't want to just be relegated to being the generation plants, right? We power the generation plants. They want to make sure that they're selling you this stuff everywhere. That's why they tried for a long time to make natural gas cars.
Here's the bottom line for why hydrogen's going to fail, and this is what I've been saying for 10 years now. Right now, like, there are some hydrogen cars you can buy. They're way more expensive than a gas car, and the fuel is way more expensive than gasoline. So from a consumer standpoint, if you're trying to tell somebody, hey guys, who's your customer, right? The only customers out there are going to be people who are driving what? Gasoline cars.
Right.
Now you're going to tell them, okay, you're going to come, you got your gasoline car, you're going to trade that in, we're going to sell you this hydrogen car. Now, you still have to go to a gas station just like you do with your gasoline car.
You can't fill up your hydrogen tank at home.
At home.
Yeah. So you're still going to have to go to a gas station, which, by the way, that hydrogen is going to cost like 10 times what your gasoline costs. And the only benefit this car is going to offer you is that it's good for the environment.
Yeah. So
Right.
I watched a
There's
video.
no added convenience.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no added benefits like there are with EVs. They're not particularly fast. They're not particularly convenient to drive. There's no real selling benefit to a hydrogen car over a gasoline car other than it's green, and that is just not going to be a mass market.
Yeah,
product.
I watched a video of, I don't know if you guys have seen it, from Diana Cowan. She's the physics girl, and I love her videos, and she's a great girl. And I hate to say this, she got this one completely wrong, but she and it was all sponsored. It was all sponsored by Toyota, I think.
Probably.
And anyway, so she did this whole big video, like two videos on it, I think. And it was all about how great hydrogen cars are and how, they're investing all this money in the network and the supply chain and all these things. And Toyota's making the next, their car is the future, and electric is going to be fine, but this is really the right way to go. It's kind of how I summed up her video. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but she spent the entire two videos telling you about how great hydrogen was and all the conveniences of it. Works just like you go to the gas station and all that, and you can even have your hydrogen delivered to your house and all of these different things. But the thing that bothered me about her video and the stance that she took was that she completely ignored the conveniences of electric cars. Right? It's like yes, those things are all going to be easy and no big deal, but electric is even easier. It's that whole misinformation campaign, you talked about in the beginning. It's like we'll just leave out these other facts over here. Don't look over here. Don't look at this.
Yep.
So that's the problem I had with it. But anyway, well, I think we've really long on this one.
Probably our longest podcast ever.
I think this will probably be our longest podcast ever, and I always cut things out that either where it didn't flow right or it just wasn't really that great. But this is going to be a long one. So for all of you guys out there that keep asking for longer podcasts, well, you're going to get your wish on this one. David, is there anything else that you had on your list you want to add?
No, but I mean, it's one of those things that there's so many more topics you could go on for hours. So maybe when we see the comments and see what people are curious
We're
about.
not going to read those, remember?
Right. For our mental health.
When we see what people are curious about, maybe we'll come revisit the topic and focus on some of those other things. Because like I said, it's a complex topic. There's a lot of stuff you could to talk about with this transition, and we didn't even talk about the autonomous part of it.
We didn't talk about self-driving or any of the things that are coming. Of course, you could technically apply those to any type of power. So, but okay, well, that will wrap up this podcast. So, will legacy car makers be around, or is it game over for them? Let us know in the comments. If you're following us on YouTube, you can watch us on video. For all the rest of the platforms, we're audio only. Thank you guys for watching or listening, and we'll see you in the next podcast.